Hot take alert, but 2020 was a bit of a crap year. But now that that is squarely behind us and the worst offender of the year is finally getting some arse-whooping as it deserves, I think we should look back to the first time humans tried to stop a global virus. That's right, we're talking about smallpox, so hold on to your butts, throw out your blankets and dress in red for the occasion. It's time to nutshell some natural history. Smallpox is the childhood name of the pox virus called Variola major. You may think it's a bit redundant to clarify that a virus with pox in the name is a pox virus, but to you I say, you fool! Science is to English what butter is to burn toast. Chickenpox is not a pox virus, and great pox is not a virus at all. But enough about herpes and syphilis, we're here to talk about pox viruses. The main thing that distinguishes smallpox and its pox virus cousins from other viruses is the way that they replicate DNA. Whilst most viruses are parasitic little pathogens that mooch off your hard work to replicate DNA, pox viruses live in the cell cytoplasm and do it themselves. That's right, smallpox and its family may well be shitty roommates, but at least they brought their own kitchenware. You may be wondering why I'm not talking about smallpox specifically, and that's because we don't have much of a clue where it came from. If we looked back 70,000 years, then smallpox probably didn't exist. If we look back 10,000 years, though, it probably did exist. Where was smallpox before this? I don't know, rodents or something. We still have a few millennia to kill before we have any evidence of it in people, so might as well pass the time by learning its symptoms. It starts with your basic illness package. You're running a fever, maybe you have a little cough, maybe a headache. Frankly, that's enough to diagnose you with just about anything, so stay at home. A few days in, you get a skin rash. By this point, you are infectious, so stay at home. After a week or so, the rashes become hard lumps in your skin. These blisters are filled with pus, and that pus is infectious, and they're probably covering your arms and legs and maybe your face as well. Don't worry, after another week or so the blisters will all form scabs. Don't pick them, they're also infectious. After the scabs eventually fall off, you'll be covered in scars that are roughly equal size. They may not look pretty, but they do serve as a telltale mark you have had smallpox. And that brings us to Egypt, 1,500 years before the Common Era, where we found some mummies that had such scarring on them. Does this mean smallpox began in ancient Egypt? Probably not, considering that smallpox isn't mentioned in any text from the Mediterranean or Middle East for another 2,000 years. Don't worry though, ancient India also has some evidence for smallpox at around the same time, written down, so maybe it started there instead. By 1,200 years BCE, there's also some evidence of smallpox in ancient China too, and if you look at your ancient civilization bingo card, you will find you have just cleared the first row. The sources on smallpox then settled down for a few years, and by a few, I mean 1,600. Don't worry, we're still in China, but this time the text is a clear reference to smallpox, and we can all sleep well at night knowing we finally have a definite historical source. But now that we've identified the disease, we have the problem of realizing how it's getting absolutely everywhere. By the 6th century, smallpox is in Korea and Japan. By the 7th century, it's in France and Italy. And some guy named Gregory of Tours names it variola. Oh look, there's 2 of them now. For some more historical sources, we turn to 9th century Persia, where the physician Rhazes take some time out from being the most important medical professional since Galen, to continue being the most important medical professional since Galen. Now the Persians can tell the difference between smallpox and measles, but the Europeans go crusading into the Middle East and bring back with them a bunch of things, including, ding ding ding, that's right, it's more smallpox. Just before all this mess though, China has the amazing idea of preventing smallpox. They do it by sniffing powdered scabs apparently. Ironically, it takes a while for this idea to catch on though. Like 7 centuries, and by that time the practice has only spread as far as the Box Chair Empire, where the Turks are writing essays about how injecting small amounts of infectious tissue into a healthy person can prevent a severe case of smallpox later. In short, they prevent themselves from catching smallpox by catching smallpox. This is known as variolation, because the virus is variola, and variola is what you are being given. But how does variolation get to Europe? Lady Mary Wortley Montagu was in Turkey in 1718 with her son and learned that elderly women would give people smallpox deliberately to protect them against future outbreaks. She then came back to England, had her daughter variolated too, and convinced the Princess of Wales that it was a good idea. Around the same time in America, a doctor named Zabdiel Boylston started variolating patients in Boston, where he proved that you were 15 times less likely to die of smallpox from variolation than you were of smallpox from not variolation. But wait, I hear you cry. How did smallpox get to the Americas? Well, I'm glad you asked. It actually starts with smallpox coming to Western Africa in the 15th century when the Portuguese roll up. This is a major source of smallpox into the Americas once the transatlantic slave trade gets going, but that's getting way ahead of ourselves. Smallpox was never native to the Americas, so when the Spanish roll up to do some colonialism in the 16th century, they trip headfirst into wiping out the local empires by giving them smallpox first and going to war with them second. Then the rest of Europe pile drives into North America and we're off to the races. So it's now the middle of the 1700s and everybody, everywhere, is practicing variolation. Except the French, but don't worry, Catherine the Great of Russia is making up for it by pledging to variolate all her countrymen. Oh, and this little baby's been born. His name is Edward. Come 1796, Edward is going to prove that there's a way to make people immune to smallpox by giving them a different disease entirely. This disease comes from cows and is a poxvirus, so they call it cowpox. This means that, unlike smallpox, cowpox has more than one host species, but it is so closely related to smallpox that when a human recovers from cowpox, they become immune to smallpox too. Our boy Edward wasn't the first person to figure this out, but unlike everybody before him, he had the good grace to write down his method and prove that it actually worked. Edward also had the grace of naming this practice, and he named it vaccination, from the Latin for cow. So, is that how Smallpox's story ends? No, you fool, there's two of them now. It's a century since Jenner invents vaccines and humanity has just found the second of the two. Variola minor. It's like smallpox, only it's less of a show-off, which means despite being less lethal, it's also super duper sneaky and is keeping the case rates high. Thankfully, the vaccine protects people against both strains of variola, so we just have to be more vigilant for outbreaks, but now we've hit the 20th century and that means it's time for war! By the 1950s, North America, Europe and large parts of South America are free of smallpox. But 2 million people a year are still dying of the disease. So the World Health Assembly was called upon in 1959 to rid the world of smallpox, and they tried, and they failed. So they tried again in 1967, and this time they were able to have much greater reach. They wiped smallpox out of South America in 1971, Asia in 1975, and Africa in 1977. The World Health Organization declared smallpox eradicated in 1980, and it was the first disease to be declared so. Afterwards, all the laboratory stocks of the disease in the world were destroyed, except for one in the USA and one in Russia, because if any two nations would keep the last 2 doses of a highly dangerous disease, it would be these lovers. And that's everything you need to know about smallpox. It's been dead for 40 years, prevention is better than cure, and get your vaccines when you can. Stay safe, bye.